In the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, and how well we have learned to let go. Jack Kornfield. My guest on this episode of Passing the Torch podcast is Jon Macaskill. Jon is a retired Navy SEAL commander turned mindfulness and meditation teacher. He's a Naval Academy graduate and has his master's in operations research from the Naval Postgraduate School. Jon has served in Iraq, Afghanistan, off the coast of Somalia, and in Panama. Jon brings mindfulness and meditation to high-performing teams to aid in dealing with stress, anxiety, and depression, all while increasing focus, creativity, and productivity. Since ending his 24-year military career in June 2020, Jon is now dedicated to spreading the practices of meditation and mindfulness to help others live happier and more fulfilling lives. One of the ways he accomplishes this is through a podcast he co-hosts titled Men Talking Mindfulness. Without further ado, Passing the Torch podcast with Jon Macaskill starts now. Well, again, thank you so much for doing this. I mean, this means a lot to me. I know starstruck almost in a way when I met you at the Leadership Summit last month. I have to give a shout out to Eric Schwartz, aka Vice, and you have to say it Vice, like your Iceman or whatever from Top Gun. Yeah. He introduced us, and I just and since then I've been following your content and the Men Talking Mindfulness podcast. But first and foremost, how are you?
Hey, Martin, I'm great, man. Thanks for having me. And
of course,
and there's absolutely no reason to be starstruck, brother. We're cut from the same cloth. We're hearts of service, serving in our awesome United States military.
Yeah,
I'm just on the other side of that retirement line. That's all that is, man. So, thank you for what you do.
I appreciate that
with your podcast and with our service. So, booyah, brother.
I love the T-shirt, the chemistry table, and it says "Be awesome." That's good. Yeah.
A buddy of mine created that, and he sent me like 20 shirts, and now I just rock them all the time, and it's almost become part of my brand.
No, it's good. Speaking of your brand, and I want to talk about your podcast. How did you get started, or maybe you and your buddy Will? How did you guys get started with this idea?
Yeah, it's funny because about this time last year, I was with him, and I was like, man, what we're doing it's starting to be a waste of time. But I'll backtrack before I get into that conversation. He has a decent following on Instagram, and he and I were we were talking back and forth about mindfulness, about meditation. He was telling me about his journey. I was sharing mine, and we were having about a once a month phone call. And then I saw his following on Instagram, and I was like, hey, man, why don't we do something together to bring what we do to your following? So it honestly started with just literally two men talking about mindfulness with no structure whatsoever. It was just us shooting the bull about mindfulness on his Instagram Live account. And, we'd have like 5 people who watch it live, and then we have like another 3 that may watch it later. And so it started as something very small. Because it was small, but it was still taking a lot of time, I was like, Will, man, unless we figure out some way to make this a little bit bigger than it is, I'm going to have to cut away from this because I just don't have the time. And right around that same time, we figured out how to rip content off of Instagram TV or Instagram Live, actually rip the audio off. So we ripped that audio off, and I was like, well, let's just throw it out there and as a podcast. It's not professionally produced. It's not professionally recorded. It's just raw, uncut, and unapologetic. And that became our saying: raw, uncut, and unapologetic. And we're like, hey, let's just throw it out there. And it had a decent little following just to start, nothing formal. And then we started getting a professional mic, and then we started doing some professional video, and we put up our sound panels around us to make the audio sound better. And it just started growing, and then people started reaching out. They're like, hey, we love what you're doing. And then since then, we've actually developed structure to what the show is going to be about. We've developed an outline to who we're going to bring on as guests. And then we've created a following on the different social media platforms. and it's starting to explode. It was never in my wildest dreams a plan to be a podcast host, but here we are. The whole premise of the show is what happens when you get a retired Navy SEAL commander and a hippie meditation teacher together to talk about mindfulness. And we really have no idea. I mean, the show, we have a framework for what each show will cover, but you never know what the other person's going to say, and then you kind of riff off that. So it's a lot of fun. We bring some great guests on, and we're going to have we're in season 3 right now. We're going to be bringing some really great guests on this season. So we're having a lot of fun with it.
No, I love your guys' content. And it's funny, you talked about you being the Navy SEAL and Will being this hippie, because you get that perception when you look at your guys' About Us page on your website, right? There's that picture of you in your uniform, and then there's Will with that beard and shoulder length gear, and it's just like, how does that happen? How do these guys come together? You talked about you and Will just kind of having like these conversations like once a month, and like, hey, this is what's going on. But I kind of want to go before that. How did mindfulness enter your life before that? Like, what kind of drove those conversations or those thoughts? And the reason I asked that is because I know toxic masculinity was kind of like a big thing a couple of years ago, but I love that the world's becoming more accepting of men sharing their ideas and emotions. But yeah, how did it enter your life?
Well, I'll get to the mindfulness piece here in a second. I love that you mentioned the toxic masculinity, because that's something that Will and I talk about often.
Yep.
And that term gets misused a lot, and a lot of men take offense to that term. The term toxic masculinity does not mean masculinity is toxic. The term toxic masculinity means that if you are forcing masculinity on other people, then that's toxic. If you're forcing the preconceived notions, the society accepted notions of what masculinity is on other people, then that's being toxic. If you force anything on other people, that's toxic. Okay. But like if you force the perception that men shouldn't cry or that boys shouldn't cry, that's being toxic. If you are forcing the fact that men should drive big trucks and shoot guns, I love shooting guns. I used to drive a big truck. That's all well and good. Hey, good for you. More power to you. But that doesn't mean you need to force that on somebody else.
Yeah.
And if they are not driving a big truck and they're not shooting guns or doing whatever, that doesn't make them not masculine, and it doesn't make them lesser beings. So I just want to make sure I throw that out there.
Yeah.
As far as the mindfulness aspect, how I personally got into it is kind of a long story, but I'll give you, as we were discussing before, we're both avid readers. And I like to start by getting kind of the Reader's Digest version of a book, and then realizing whether or not I like it, and then going after and reading the full book later. So I'll give the Reader's Digest version of how I got to mindfulness. The long story short is, in the SEAL teams, battled with stress, anxiety, survivor's guilt, moral injury from what I saw, what I did on the battlefield, and the losses that I experienced along the way. And that survivor's guilt, depression, stress, anxiety, moral injury, all that manifested itself as anger. It manifested itself as sadness. It manifested itself as confusion. It manifested itself as guilt. And that caused me to have some very dark thoughts about whether or not I deserve to be here still, whether or not I should go on in life. And I went and sought counseling, and I was actually on medication for all that now at this point. And the medication had numbed things to a point, but it had numbed some of the enjoyment as well. So I went and saw a counselor who recommended meditation. And the fact that he recommended it to me was a godsend, but I didn't realize it at the time. I laughed at him. I was like, meditation? What?
Yeah.
So like in my mind,
and you're in the SEALs at this point, right? Like this is when, yeah. And like how long, how deep into the SEALs, like how many years in had you been?
So at this time, I was in the SEALs about 15 years.
Oh, so I mean, so you're definitely like a seasoned salty, right? Or maybe not salty, but like a seasoned veteran of the SEAls, right?
Right.
So yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I've been in for a while. Yeah. It was definitely dealing with the stuff from decades or maybe a decade and a half ago.
Yeah.
And unpacking it. So anyway, this guy recommends it to me. I laugh at him. I'm thinking, hey, look, I'm in this big, bad, hairy, scary frogman. Don't tell me about meditation, dude. And
Yeah.
he's like, well, okay, if I had something that would improve your performance physically and mentally, if I had something that would improve your life personally and professionally, if I could give that to you in a pill, would you take it? And as a type A personality, special operator, you're always looking for an edge over the enemy on the battlefield, or you're looking for an edge over your buddy right next to you. And I was like, yeah, whatever that is, I would take that pill. And he's like, well, that same pill, quote unquote, is meditation. It will improve your life. It will improve your performance professionally and personally. It will improve your performance mentally and physically. And so I went back and I started meditating with one of the apps that he had recommended. I downloaded a simple app called Insight Timer at the time. And a type A personality, I jumped right into an hour-long meditation and failed about 30 seconds into it. Or at least I thought that I had failed. You can't fail at meditation. It's just what you perceive. And so I perceived that I was a failure, and I went back and I was like, man, Doc, I'm failing at this meditation stuff. It's not for me. And he's like, well, that's like lining up at the starting line of a marathon without ever having run a step before. You've got to work your way up to a longer meditation. Start small, start simple. So I went back, started small, started simple, worked my way up to 3, 5, 10-minute meditations, simple breath work, nothing super in depth, nothing super emotional, just some simple breath work, much like I led you guys through when we all met a couple weeks back. And that started to have immediate effects. I started to feel the relaxation. I started to feel de-stressed, not distressed. All right. So I just want to make sure I emphasize that. So it helped, but then those effects would wear off. I would get in traffic, get cut off by some jerk, and then I would be back into the red. So this guy was like, look, the lasting effects come about 2 months in. Just like the gym, using another gym analogy, if you work out for 2 months, that's when you start to see the effects with your body. That's when you start to really feel the long-lasting effects. And so I did that. I meditated for another 2 months or so, and that's when I started to have those long-lasting effects. And right around the same time, I was starting to think about what I wanted to do when I left the military. And I had buddies coming up to me asking me what I was doing differently, because they saw the positive sides in me and what I was doing. And I was starting to teach them about meditation. And then the light bulb kind of went off. I was like, I can do this for a living and help people attain kind of the sense of fulfillment and then sense of peace that I have. And I mean, I'm certainly not always fulfilled. I'm certainly not always at a sense of peace. But when I do meditate and when I live mindfully, it allows me to bring everything down and settle down and be in that sense of peace and be in that sense of fulfillment in the here and now. And that's what I want for others. So that's how I got to it. And then as far as the show, Men Talking Mindfulness, Will and I got introduced by a mutual friend, former Army captain, West Point grad. I won't hold that against him, but West Point grad guy. And then Will and I have hit it off ever since. So yeah, here we are.
Will's the man. Like he's friends with a Navy SEAL, a West Point grad. Like he's just he's shattering stereotypes, I guess, right?
He is. Yeah, he's a great guy, man. He's tied into everything.
Yeah, Will, I love listening to your guys' podcast. So when you listen to this, Jon, I want to go back even further on the SEALs. You talked about you started getting to like meditation. I want to unpack this a little bit. Meditation. Sure. You're 15 years in. At that point, I'm assuming probably like 33, 34, 35. And like most males, you're pretty much set, right, in terms of like how you do things and personality and all that stuff. But how do you feel like had you learned this maybe earlier in your career when you were like 22, 23, 24, how that the mindfulness and meditation, how would that have shaped you differently then versus later on?
Yeah, great question, Martin. Honestly, I wish all the time that I'd been introduced to these at a much younger age. One, so that I could handle what I saw on the battlefield, the loss that I was dealt, I guess, for lack of a better term right now, on the battlefield. And then also so that I could be a more compassionate, more effective leader. I think when I was young, 22, even probably all the way up to 30 or so, I was kind of a go-getter type A personality, always looking towards the next mission, next goal, and what can we do to achieve that goal personally and as a team, and putting everything else aside, right? Saying, you know what, okay, you have a family, whatever. I don't care about your family. We're marching towards this goal. I didn't ever say I don't care about your family, but in the back of my mind,
in
the back of my mind, there was a little piece of that. And when I was younger than I am now, I'm 44 now. I've got a 4-year-old daughter, a 2-year-old son, and a 9-week-old daughter.
Well, congrats on the 9. Yeah, congrats.
Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, she's pretty awesome. So the mentality that I have now has changed both because of mindfulness and meditation, but also because I'm a father. And I think back when I was a single guy in the military, and then a married man, but not a father. I was married previously and since divorced. I think mindfulness would have made me a better husband to my first wife, would have made me more compassionate leader in the teams, the SEAL teams, and just as in society. I think when I saw other men who had kids at the time, I was like, hey, those kids weren't issued to you, so I'm not taking them into account with planning the mission and how long we're out of town for training or how long we're out of town on deployment, which I think was definitely a misstep on my part. But also, I mean, even further backing it all the way up into like high school. Like I was an athlete in high school, ran track and cross country, like ate, drank, and breathe running.
Yeah.
And I think that if I had mindfulness and meditation, it would allow me to see that there was more to life than that, one. And then two, it would have made me a better runner anyhow. Even though I realized that there was more to life, I would have been a better runner because my mind would have realized as I was running an event, hey, there's pain right now, be with that pain, push past it. And I think mindfulness meditation ultimately makes you just a better, more well-rounded person in just about anything you do, physically, mentally, spiritually, socially. So I wish that I had it earlier.
Man, I love that. That's a great answer. And really, I feel like it just, because it really, when we did those exercises at that conference last month, I've started doing those, not daily, but just a couple of times during the week, just
Good.
because, and I feel like it get angry or whatever, right? But
sure,
but it's a start, right? And I feel like I'm at least opening up my mind. So with that, you talked about just different, you're having some bad thoughts and stuff in the past, but throughout all your trial and tribulations, what's something that you've learned about fear and anxiety over the years?
Funny enough, I was talking about this very subject less than an hour ago. I think fear and anxiety, so much of fear and anxiety is thinking about the future, or even more specifically, imagining a future that doesn't exist yet and may never exist. So, for instance, jumping out of an airplane, right? What's your fear or anxiety about jumping out of an airplane?
The parachute's not going to open, right?
The parachute is not going to open. And sure, that can happen, but your being anxious or you're having fear about that is not going to change whether or not that parachute opens. And more often than not, a very high percentage, more often than not, that fear never is realized. That parachute opens, you land on the ground. And I mean, obviously that's an analogy that could have been a reality, but that analogy can apply to anything. So much of the time we have a fear about failure and we end up not failing. We have an anxiety about missing something and we end up not missing it. We have this future mentality where we're constantly imagining what the future is going to be like. And no matter how much of a psychic you are, whatever the case may be, you can never get that future perfect. That future, one, the future will never be perfect in your mind. And two, what you imagine will never be exactly what the future's like. So I think fear and anxiety, we just need to realize that it is our imagination. Our imagination is what drives that fear and anxiety, whether it's jumping out of an airplane, admitting your love for someone, or whatever. You always you have to realize it's mostly your imagination that's driving that.
So kind of like, what are your tips then for people that feel like they're not focused and overwhelmed?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, as a mindfulness and meditation teacher, I'd be remiss if I didn't say start with some simple breath work, focusing on that breath, quite literally focusing on the physical sensations of the breath, noticing that you are here and now, and in the here and now, you are okay. Everything is okay. And by doing that, you can settle your mind. I'm big on analogies, so forgive me, but
no, I love
always
it.
Imagine. Yeah, I imagine that in the morning, first thing that happens, most of our alarms go off to wake us up out of bed. Most of our alarms are on our phones.
Yeah.
We roll over, we turn that alarm off, and instantly we're getting fed information. Literally from the second that we wake up, we start getting fed information, notifications that we missed, emails that came in, social media, news media. We start getting fed all this. And in the analogy of the snow globe, that's that snow globe getting shaken up. And not only is that snow globe getting shaken up, but if you can imagine that snow globe is having extra flakes injected into it every morning. So it gets more and more cloudy every day. Well, what mindfulness and meditation allow you to do is set that snow globe down, let the snowflakes that have just been shaken all over the place settle to the bottom, and let maybe 4 or 5 snowflakes just keep moving around. And now you can focus on those 4 or 5 snowflakes. Those are the things that you need to think about. Those are the things that you need to get done for the day. Those are the I love yous that you need to say, or the time that you need to spend with your family. Those are the snowflakes that really matter. And then as you go through the day, that snow globe gets shaken up again. Maybe if you don't have time to actually do a full meditation, you can just do a simple breath work. And that breath work again brings you into the here and now, and it settles that snow globe down again. And as you do that more and more often, that snow globe becomes harder to shake, and you stay more focused on what's truly important. So yeah, I would just say for someone who is potentially struggling with either thoughts about the past, or ruminating about something that they screwed up yesterday or last week or last year, or anxiety about the future, either tomorrow, next year, or whatever, just start with some simple breath work, focusing literally on the physical sensations of breathing in, breathing out. Do that. Notice how that changes how you feel. Start to do it more and more often. And the more often you do it, the better it's going to be for you.
That's amazing. I love that analogy. See, that would be like a perfect 5-minute clip or whatever, right? If we were to parse this out. So I have to admit, I only prepped one question for this, right? And I'm about to ask this question. Everything we talked about thus far, it's just based off conversation, right? So it's been very organic, but I did prep one question. But yeah, I just want to talk about you being a Navy SEAL, and I purposely don't say former, because to me, from the outside looking in, a SEAL once a SEAL, always a SEAL. What are some things, thoughts and beliefs that and now that you're retired from the military, what are some thoughts and beliefs that you've changed your mind on over the years? And I guess we kind of already answered that with a mindfulness and meditation, but I thought maybe if there's something else you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, my beliefs on a lot of things. I still feel that my ideals and values are fairly well set in stone, but there's definitely some misunderstandings that I had, and some beliefs, and I don't want to get political and take a misstep for either myself or you and your show, so I won't get into that. But I definitely 15 years ago thought differently about a whole lot of things. Again, like I mentioned before, fatherhood. I respected the fathers for being fathers, but I also wanted them to prioritize the mission and the military first. And there's times you have to. There are still, as a father, you have to.
Yeah.
But now, as a father, I realize how hard that was. I realize, back 10, 15, 20 years ago, I had this thought, and I forget who said it originally, but, he who dies with the most toys wins. And that's certainly not what I believe now. I believe, I don't need to make millions of dollars and have tons of toys.
Yeah.
I want to share the wealth, both literal wealth and knowledge wealth, with as many people as I can. Yeah, I've changed my mind about a lot of things, and I'm sure that if you talk to me in 5 or 10 years, there will be some further enlightenment and wisdom that has further changed my mind. But again, I think the ideals and values that I held dear as a young man primarily still hold dear. Commitment to hard work, honesty, integrity, faith, those things. Those, I don't think those will ever change.
I appreciate that. And that's good. I love that. I want to go a different route now, and on a little bit lighter note, and maybe throw you for a loop. When you're like depicting an image of leadership, who or what comes to mind? And it could be a person, it could be someone from a movie, it could be Eric Schwartz. I don't know, whatever. It could be Will.
Yeah. So
it could be the Green Lantern.
There's a few things that pop to mind, and I think Dwight D. Eisenhower pops to mind, both in his military leadership and then subsequently as president. Just the way that he cared about the country, but then also cared deeply about each individual. I think that pops to mind as far as an actual person. And then as far as a what, Band of Brothers pops to mind. I think every single leader should be required to watch that entire series every year of their lives.
Yeah.
And Dick Winters, his leadership throughout that entire series is phenomenal, bar none. And there's ethical and moral dilemmas that he faces, and you can basically watch Band of Brothers and find the answer to whatever ethical or moral dilemma you may be facing. So I think those are probably the two things. I guess three things really. One being real Dwight D. Eisenhower, and then Dick Winters, and then the Band of Brothers series is phenomenal for leadership.
Absolutely, you're saluting the rank, not the man.
That's right.
I love that line. I love also the Dwight D. The Ike reference, because even when you think of like that time frame, the World War II generals were very famous, even present day. We talk about General Eisenhower, MacArthur, Patton, and even like General Bradley, who a lot of people don't talk about. But I always like to, when I teach like a professional development session, there's one I teach about don't lead with your ego. But anyway, one of the references I talk about,
there's an example of what not to do for that.
Yeah, exactly. And not that General Patton had an ego, but when we think about like both, like General Patton is revered, I'd say, by a lot of people throughout our nation's history, and talked about a lot in history books and all that. But he's notorious, or at least he has this reputation, the way this, history tells it, as it's very like in your face, like, I guess type A.
Yeah.
But still a highly effective leader. On the flip side of that, you had General Bradley, whose nickname was G.I. Brad. And, just very, very approachable and very a man of the people, a general of the people, but also a highly effective leader. So it just shows that there's more than one way to lead, and they can be on opposite ends of the spectrum. But same with Eisenhower, right? When I read about Eisenhower, he doesn't come across as like this in-your-face type guy. He comes across as very soft-spoken, very reserved, but still highly effective. And
yeah, exactly. I think if you boil it down, even when ego gets in the way, there are even some very big ego personalities. They still have a level of compassion. And I think that's where a lot of leaders end up winning as leaders, is having that compassion for they're men, and honestly, again, as we talked about in the session last month, having compassion for themselves. So I mean, whether it's Bradley, whether it's Patton, whether it's MacArthur, whether it's Eisenhower,
Yeah.
At some level they still have compassion, and that's where those who don't lead well, I think that's where they go wrong, is they don't have that compassion for their fellow man, or even themselves. So I think that's where the kind of the common thread. And then, when I say compassion, I'm not talking weakness, right? I'm not talking that they're out there being soft. You can be strong and compassionate, and that's where many of those men are perceived, because they're strong, as being non-compassionate or not showing any compassion.
Yeah.
And that's not true.
Do you feel like it's becoming more acceptable, or people appreciate and acknowledge that vulnerability equals strength? Like, 'cause I've always felt like strength is more than how much you can lift inside of a gym, right? But yeah, just kind of, what are your quick thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Brene Brown fan.
Yep.
And vulnerability is strength. I mean, she talks about when she sits down on an airplane and somebody asks her what she does, and she's like, well, I talk about vulnerability and strength. And somebody says, oh yeah, two separate ends of the spectrum. And that's not at all the case.
No.
It takes a lot of strength to show vulnerability. It's easy to put on this shield or this fake cloak or fake mask and walk around as though you're not being vulnerable. That's easy.
Yeah.
But eventually what it is you're dealing with is going to come back and bite you. So it's much more difficult to face it up front, and then not only face it up front, but express the fact that you need help. And that takes strength. It takes courage. So my belief is 100% that vulnerability is strength.
All right. Here's another wild card for you.
All right.
One day a movie will be made about your life. I'm calling it now. So The Rock will clearly play me. But
obviously.
But when a movie is inevitably made about your life, one, what would the title be? And two, who would play you?
Title. This is a great question, man. I love it. I have not been asked this, and I've been on a handful of podcasts, and I've never been asked this. So movie title, maybe Mindful Frogman. That's my handle on the various social media platforms, Mindful Frogman. And I think with what I do now and then what I used to do in the teams, I think that would make sense. And then I've been told this, though I don't really see it myself, that I don't know. I see you wagging your finger. Do you know who I'm going to go with? A lookalike, somewhat anyway.
How big of an actor are we talking? Like, how popular anyway?
Fairly popular action guy.
I'm gonna say, I could be wrong. I'm gonna say Chris Pratt. Is it?
Ooh, yeah. I like you, man.
Guardians of the Galaxy, Chris Pratt, right? The one where he's standing there like this. Yeah.
Not the Parks and Recreation Chris Pratt. I was not thinking Chris Pratt, but I think I prefer that. I was going to say Gerard Butler.
Dude, yeah, I see it. I think because your hair's lighter than his, right? But I see it now. You know what you should do? How close are you with your buddies with Eric Schwartz, right? Yeah. I'm going to pick on him. What you should do is next time you see him in public, this is part of your training. You should just sneak up on him. Use your SEAL training. And don't tell him that you're there. Wait till he's standing up, and I want you to Spartan kick him in the chest and be like, this is mindful. No, say, this is mindfulness or something like that. And just kick him Spartan kick him right in the chest. He'll appreciate it. And then and just say like, hey, that's from your buddy Will or whatever. Blame Will. But yeah. That's leadership 101. Throw your friends under the bus. No,
definitely. That's a first lesson.
First lesson, day one of SEAL training. First lesson.
That's right.
One last question. A question I like to ask every single podcast guest is: I know there's Powers Boulevard, but what's like another big like street or road or interstate in Colorado Springs? We'll say there's I don't know if you can picture this, but just imagine if there's a lot of traffic in Colorado Springs. And everyone's stuck in traffic, and there's this giant billboard with your picture on it. And it also says above it, like, hey, this is not Gerard Butler. This is Jon Macaskill. But if there's a giant billboard with you on it, and for everyone to see with your message, what would you want that message to say?
Oh, man. You've got some really great questions. I love it. Let's see, what would I want that to say? Yeah, something to the effect of maybe slow down and to take a second, take a breath, and notice what's around you. Something to that effect, because it could play into the traffic, yeah. Right? And then also like having compassion for those fellow drivers as human beings. So something to the effect of slow down and take in what's around you right now.
That's perfect. Especially in Colorado Springs, right? With all the mountains and
man, it's beautiful.
Oh, that's great. That's that's perfect. Lastly, I want to close out. Where can people find you? Because you have a lot of great projects going on. You're involved with a lot of things, and I'm sure people are going to want to learn more about you. But where can they go?
Yeah, right on. Thanks, Martin. So primarily I'm prolific on LinkedIn. I am on other social medias. As I said before, the handle is Mindful Frogman on most other social media platforms. But you look me up on LinkedIn, that's where I spend most of my time. I believe that's the platform where you can share both professional and motivational stuff. Jon, Jon Macaskill, Macaskill, but I'm sure Martin will put that in the links. And then Men Talking Mindfulness. That's our podcast with me and Will Schneider, and then we have some great guests, and then sometimes it's just me and Will talking mindfulness. So look us up.
Awesome, love it. Bonus question: who would play him in the movie?
Ooh, who would play Will?
Ryan Gosling.
That'd be a good one. Ryan's a good one. Man, you're good. I like that one a lot.
I just threw that out there, but the people get The Rock and I mistake us all the time. So
totally,
yeah.
So The Rock, funny story about The Rock. His cousin or nephew, I forget, was actually a SEAL and served at my first team, and he looked a lot like him, but much smaller. And so we always used to mess with him and call him the Pebble instead of the Rock. After this, I'll look him up on social media and send you a picture, and you'll see the likeness. But it's pretty crazy.
No, that's awesome. So
yeah,
well, good deal. Hey, Jon, thank you so much for this. Again, this meant a lot to me. I appreciate you. When Eric Schwartz introduced us at the conference last month, man, I was just we started talking. I got super excited, and we've been trying to plan this for over a month. So the fact that it actually happened, again. Love your show, love your content, just love everything that you're doing. You're definitely an inspiration to me. So just thank you, kind sir.
My pleasure. Thank you, Martin. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Thanks for helping spread the word, and thanks for what you're doing, both again right here and for your service, brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks again to my guest, Jon Macaskill. You can check him out on Instagram at the Mindful Frogman. You can also listen to his podcast along with his co-host Will, titled Men Talking Mindfulness. And you can get that wherever you get your podcast. Additional links will also be provided in the notes section of this show. All right, everyone. Thanks again for listening. I'd love to hear your feedback. If you have any thoughts or even just about a Navy SEAL who focuses on mindfulness and meditation, kind of going against a typical stereotype, I think. Again, just great insight, great points from Jon, and I'm so thankful for his time. And I'd love to get everyone's feedback. All right, everyone. Hope you enjoyed. And remember, vision, relate, develop. Take care, everyone. Foster out.